Howdy, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for being here, as always, for another interesting little episode here. As you can see by the thumbnail, 1811, 1812, what happened? We're going to talk a little bit about some phenomenon in the sky. And this episode will focus on what happened on the Mississippi River and read one of my favorite accounts. You know, I've clipped, maybe over 100 articles from 1811 and 1812, you know, things falling from the sky, comets, meteors, volcanoes, weird sounds, earthquakes, on and on. And yeah, this is one of my favorites. So if you like this, make sure to leave a comment and let me know. And I might consider doing a few more in this episode, a few more along the lines of this information 1812, 1811. The New Madrid event, which was really an event that took place from Florida to New England and was felt as far as Wyoming, and possibly reshaped many areas we're unaware of. Now, if you remember in my Missouri Anomalous America episode, and for those that haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I go into early accounts of New Madrid and how it was a prehistoric metropolis, a giant, ancient prehistoric town that housed millions possibly and was buried in some event. Now, is this related to 1811, 1812? Definitely, possibly. And some of the things that were revealed during this event were quite interesting. Some of the things that were covered up also quite interesting. Many cave systems were rendered unexplorable after this event, and were left to very, very scant firsthand accounts of some of these cave systems before this event. Was something going on in these cave systems? Did radium play a part? These are all things I've discussed um, to quite an extent in my radium series, and there'll be more coming in that series in regards to volcanism, um, radium effects below our feet, the oil and gas markets, um, their creation, and how radium plays a part in all of that. But yeah, as always, thanks for being here. Let's jump right into this article. We're going to cover two. One's very short, but ties in nicely. And like I said, if you enjoy the material and you would like more from this time frame, let me know in the comments, and I'll work on another video. This article is from 1819 or 1812. I can't remember which. My apologies. I'll look that up before the end of the video and give you the exact date. I'll also put a link in the description for it as well. From the New York Evening Post of February 11th, earthquake. We have postponed a number of articles prepared for this evening's paper to make room for the following very interesting communication from an intelligent friend at New Orleans. It is, we presume, the most particular and satisfactory account of the earthquakes on the Mississippi which has yet been published. And Mr. Pierce, being an ear and eyewitness to the scenes he describes, the authenticity of his narrative cannot be doubted. To the editor of the New York Evening Post, Big Prairie on the Mississippi, 760 miles from New Orleans. This puts him pretty close to Cairo. December 25th, 1811. Now, if you've been following my anomalous series, I appreciate you very much for doing so. And it means a whole lot to me. Missouri was an incredible episode. I'm going to re-record some clips from Missouri just for better quality. I had an audio issue. A clone of me was made in StreamYard. I couldn't get rid of it, so I'm pretty frustrated. Lots of good material was garbled. I'll be re-recording some of that that will make amazing correlations with this material here. What they found underneath the Missouri or Mississippi River will blow your mind. So if you haven't watched that episode, I strongly recommend it. I'll also be re-recording a specific section that ties in nicely, probably tomorrow or the following day. So stay tuned for that. Um, and then my upcoming Kentucky episode, Tuesday, um, Tuesday the 22nd. Absolutely going to be a fire episode, real banger. Definitely check that out. Don't miss it. So hopefully I'll see some of you on Tuesday. And as always, thanks for being here. Back to the article. Dear Sir, desirous of offering the most correct information to society at large and of contributing in some degree to the speculations of the philosopher, I am induced to give publicity to a few remarks concerning a phenomenon of the most alarming nature. Through you, therefore, I take the liberty of addressing the world and describing as far as the inadequacy of my means at present will permit the most prominent and interesting features of the events which have recently occurred upon this portion of the Western waters. Proceeding on a tour from Pittsburgh to New Orleans, I entered the Mississippi where it receives the waters of the Ohio on Friday. So, yeah, the Ohio and the Mississippi join. The 13th day of this month, and on the 15th in the evening, landed on the left bank of this river, about 116 miles from the mouth of the Ohio. The night was extremely dark and cloudy, not a star appeared in the heavens, and there was every indication of a severe rain for the last 3 days indeed. The sky had been continually overcast and the weather unusually thick and hazy. It would be improper to observe that these waters are descended in a variety of small craft, but generally in flat-bottomed boats, built to serve a temporary purpose and intended to float with the current, being supplied with oars, not so much to accelerate progress as to assist it in navigating the boats and avoiding the numerous bars, trees, and timber which greatly impede the navigation of this river. In one of these boats I had embarked, and the more effectively to guard against anticipated attacks from the savages, who are said to be at present much ex- expectorated, expacerated against the whites. Several boats had proceeded in company. Precisely at 2 o'clock on Monday morning, the 16th, we were all alarmed by the violent and convulsive agitation of the boats, accompanied by a noise similar to that which would have been produced by running over a sandbar. Every man was immediately aroused and rushed upon deck. We were first of opinion that the Indians, studious of some mischief, had loosened our cables, and thus situated we were foundering. Upon examination, however, we discovered that we were yet safely and securely moored. The idea of an earthquake then suggested itself to my mind, and this idea was confirmed by a second shock, and the two others in immediate succession. These continued for the space of 8 minutes. So complete and general had been the convulsion that a tremulous, tremulous motion was communicated to the very leaves on the surface of the earth. A few yards from the spot where we lay, the body of a large oak was snapped in two, and the falling part precipitated to the margin of the river. The trees in the forest shook like rushes. The alarming clattering of their branches may be compared to the effect which would be produced by a severe wind passing through a large cane brake. Exposed to a most unpleasant alternative, we were compelled to remain where we were for the night, or subject ourselves to imminent hazard in navigating through the innumerable obstructions in the river. Considering the damage of running twofold, we concluded to remain. At the dawn of day, I went on shore to examine the effects of the shocks. The earth, about 20 feet from the water's edge, was deeply cracked, but no visible injury of moment had been sustained. Fearing, however, to remain longer where we were, it was thought most advisable to leave our landing as expeditiously as possible. This was immediately done at a few rods' distance from the shore. We experienced a fifth shock, more severe than either of the preceding. I had expected this from the lowering appearances of the weather. It was indeed most provin- provincial that we had started, for such was the strength of this last shock that the bank to which we were, but a few moments since attached, was rent and fell into the river, whilst the trees rushed from the forest, precipitating themselves into the water with a force sufficient to have dashed us into 1,000 atoms. It was now light, and we had an opportunity of beholding in full extent all the horrors of our situation. During the four first shocks, tremendous and uninterrupted explosions resembling a discharge of artillery was heard from the opposite shore. At the time, I imputed them to the falling of the river banks. The fifth shock explained the real cause. Wherever the veins of the earthquake ran, there was a volcanic discharge of combustible matter to great heights. An incessant rumbling was heard below, and the bed of the river excessively agitated, whilst the water assumed a turbid and boiling appearance. Near our boat, a spout of confined air, breaking its way through the waters, burst forth, and with a loud report discharged mud, sticks, and etc. from the riverbed, at least 30 feet above the surface. These spoutings were frequent, and in many places appeared to rise to the very heavens. Large trees, which had lain for ages at the bottom of the river, were shot up in thousands of instances, some with their roots uppermost and their tops planted. Others were hurled into the air. Many again were only loosened and floated upon the surface. Never was a scene more replete with terrific threatenings of death. With the most lively sense of this awful crisis, we contemplated in mute astonishment a scene which completely beggars description, and of which the most glowing imagination is inadequate to form a picture. Here, the earth, river, etc., torn with furious convulsions, opened in huge trenches whose deep jaws were instantaneously closed. There through 1,000 vents, sulphurous streams gushed from its very bowels, leaving vast and almost unfathomable caverns. Everywhere nature itself seemed tottering on the verge of dissolution. Encompassed with the most alarming dangers, the manly presence of mind and heroic fortitude of the men were all that saved them. It was a struggle for existence itself, and the meed to be purchased was our lives. During the day there was very little intermission, a continued series of shocks attended with innumerable explosions like the rolling of thunder. The bed of the river was incessantly disturbed, and the water boiled severely in every part. I considered ourselves as having been in the greatest danger from the numerous instances of boiling directly under our boat. Fortunately for us, however, they were not attended with eruptions. One of the spouts which had seen rising under the boat would inevitably have sunk it, and probably have blown it into 1,000 fragments. Our ears were constantly assailed with the crashing of timbers. The banks were instantaneously crushed down and fell with all their growth into the water. It was no less astonishing than alarming to behold the oldest trees of the forest, whose firm roots had withstood 1,000 storms and weathered the sternest tempests, quivering and shaking with the violence of the shocks, whilst their heads were whipped together with a quick and rapid motion. Many were torn from their native soil and hurled with tremendous force into the river. One of these, whose trunk, at least 3 feet in diameter, had been much shattered, was thrown better than 100 yards from the bank, where it is planted in the bed of the river, there to stand a terror to future navigators. Several small islands have been already annihilated, and from appearances many others must suffer the same fate. To one of these I ventured in a skiff, but it was impossible to examine, for the ground sunk from my tread, and the least force applied to any part of it seemed to shake the whole. Anxious to obtain landing and dreading the high banks, we made for an island which evidenced sensible marks of the earthquake. Here we fastened to willows at the extremity of a sunken piece of land and continued 2 days, hoping that this scene of horrors was now over. Still, however, the shocks continued, though not with the like frequency as before. On Wednesday in the afternoon, I visited every part of the island where we lay. It was extensive and partially covered with willow. The earthquake had rent the ground in large and numerous gaps. Vast quantities of burnt wood in every stage of alteration, from its primitive nature to stove coal, had been spread over the ground to every considerable distance. Frightful and hideous caverns yawned on every side, and the earth's bowels appeared to have felt the tremendous force of the shocks, which had thus riven the surface. I was gratified with seeing several places where those spouts, which had so much attracted our wonder and admiration, had arisen. They were generally on the beach and have left large circular holes in the sand, formed much like a funnel. For a great distance around the orifice was quantities of coal have been scattered. Many pieces weighing from 15 to 20 pounds were discharged 160 measured paces. These holes were of various dimensions. One of them, I observed, was particularly. It was 16 feet in perpendicular depth and 63 feet in circumference at the mouth. On Thursday morning, the 19th, we loosened our cables with hearts filled and fervent gratitude to Providence, whose protection had supported us through the perils to which we had been exposed. As we descended the river, everything was a scene of ruin and devastation. Where a short time since the Mississippi rolled its waters in a calm, placid current, now subterranean forests have been ushered into existence and raised their heads hard and black as ebony above the surface of the water, whose power has been so wonderfully increased that strength and skill are equally baffled. Our boat was borne down by an irresistible impulse and fortunately escaped uninjured. We passed thousands of acres of land which had been cleft from the main shore and tumbled into the water, leaving their growth waving above the surface. In many places, single trees and whole brakes of cane had slipped into the river. A singular instance of this kind particularly attracted my observations. A large sycamore had slipped from its station on the bank and had so admirably, we're going to zoom in a little bit on this part. It's a little hard to read. Had so admirably preserved its equilibrium that it has been left standing erect in the water, immersed about 10 feet, and was every appearance of having originally grown there. The shocks, I conceive, were most sensibly experienced upon the islands, and numbers of them have been much shattered. For I observe where the stratum of earth was fairest, it it old not crack, but undulated excessively. At Fort Pickering, on the extremity of the Chickasaw Bluff, and 242 miles from the north of the Ohio, the land is strong and high. There, however, the earth was extremely agitated, and the blockhouse, which is almost as s- solid mess of hewn timbers, trembled like aspen leaf. The obstructions in this river, which have always been quite numerous, are now so considerably increased as to demand the utmost prudence and caution from subsequent navigators. Indeed, I am very apprehensive that it will be almost implausible in flood waters. For uncertain time, it will be impossible to say where the currents will hereafter run. What portion, if any, of the present embarrassments will be destroyed? What new sandbars may yet be caused by this portentous phenomenon? Many poor fellows are undoubtedly wrecked or buried under the ruin of the banks. of the loss of 4 boats, I am certain. Wow. Yeah. First time I read that one was a few years ago, and crazy. When you first hear about the new Madrid event and hear stories about some of these things, but finding an actual newspaper with a first-hand account, pretty crazy. And stuff I kind of wanted to highlight in this one was the waters were boiling, um, the sulfuric smell, really important things to touch on there. Um, the correlations between these things um, are important, and I haven't heard too many um, to touch on this. So I hope you enjoyed that article. Pretty scary, terrifying. And when you connect the dots with the New Madrid Ancient Metropolis articles that I've covered about what they were finding below ground in New Madrid, and also the Egyptian temple found below the Mississippi River, it makes you think, you know, has this happened before? Absolutely. How many times? Who knows? How far back in history do these events go? Innumerable. So we're going to finish off this video reading this article here. North Carolina earthquake of 1811. For several nights, the aurora borealis illuminated the sky. Okay, so same date, timeline. Okay, same period of time. Um, a few days later. A few days later. So this one was from. This is dated the 25th of, but the actual event on the Mississippi, I believe, started on the 14th and went through the 16th. If I remember correctly. Let's look through here and give you the exact dates. Monday, the 16th. Okay, so it started on the 16th. So here we are, 3 days later. And it went on for 2 days. Can you imagine 2 days of that? Unbelievable. 2 days. One full day was constant quakes and deafening. So loud that the man could barely hear for the whole day, the whole time the sun was up. So yeah, like I said, North Carolina earthquake, 1811, 3 days after the previous article. Gentlemen, I take the liberty to transmit the following account of an earthquake which happened on the night between the 15th. Wow. So it's the same night. Okay, perfect. Same night, same night. For several nights previous, the aurora borealis brilliantly illuminated the sky with its trembling coruscations. The late appearance of the splendid comet, the blood-like color of the sun for several days, had alarmed a great many superstitious people. They talked of war, and when the news of Governor Harrison's dear bought victory arrived, it brought to their recollection all those appearances which are still believed, as these are now, to have been the awful precursors of that bloody war which we gained our independence. On Monday morning about 1 o'clock, the inhabitants of this place were roused from their peaceful slumbers by a dreadful sound. Some wagoneers who were up the time it began said it resembled, but was louder, than if 100 wagons were driven at full speed down the mountain. This gave us a considerable alarm. The timid took to prayer, expecting every moment, as they say, to hear the sound of the last trumpet. The more courageous ventured to open their doors to discover what occasioned the noise. A sudden trembling of the earth caused fresh terror and alarm from which we had not time to recover when we felt a violent shock which lasted about 3 minutes and was attended by a hollow rumbling noise and ended with a dreadful crash, leaving behind a strong sulphurous, there's that word again, sulphurous stench. For the remainder of the night, all was still and calm, but was spent by us in trembling anxiety. When the wished for morning came, we were happy to find no lives were lost, but while some of us were in the street congratulating each other on our happy escape, we were again alarmed by a much louder noise. It is somewhat strange that its effects were more violent in the valleys than on the mountains. A tan yard in a valley near this place had several vats displaced. The edges of some were raised 3 feet above their former level. Others were moved partly round and left in a zigzag manner. It would far exceed the bounds of this letter to describe all the phenomenon produced by this awful convulsion of nature. Rocks moved, hills shook, houses shattered. A wonderful change has taken place in the manners of the people. I believe so many fervent prayers never were put up in this place as were on the fearful night and morning. I think what has been done may be may be termed a revival in religion. I have just seen a gentleman from Knoxville who passed Sunday night with Mr. Nelson at Warm Springs. From his account, his situation was more terrifying than ours. For several hours previous to the shock, a much tremendous noise was heard from the neighboring mountains. At intervals, it is quite. In the morning, it was observed that a large stream of warm water, temperature 142 degrees, issued from a fissure in a rock on the side of the mountain, which had been opened the preceding night. While they were examining it, another shock was felt while it lasted 2 minutes. Although a perfect, I apologize, hard to read, a perfect something, the tops of the trees appeared to be greatly altered. The earth shook violently, and the water of the warm springs at the time overflowed by French Broad River was thrown up several times to the height of 30 or 40 feet. Several masses of stone were loosened from their ancient beds and precipitated from the summits and sides of the mountains. This, in particular, well known to Western travelers by the name of Painted Rock, was thrown from its base and fell across the road that led from Hints to Knoxville. It was completely shut up the passage of wagons. A great many people who are moving westward are in a pitiable situation, as this includes season. I apologize, it's all torn apart here, the paper. Being unable to proceed until a road is made around the rock. In this, they are cheerfully assisted by the neighbors. I have been for 3 months in these dreary regions examining a mine of cobalt. The ore is rich. It abounds with arsenic. In we intend to calcine the ore and prepare it for exploration or perhaps manufacture it to smalt. The mine is within a few miles, Mackeyville. Oh, man. Um, and then, so because we touched on so many things there, the aurora borealis, the comet, the sun changed color, right? The sun changed to a bright red, dark red, blood-like color of the sun for several days leading up to this. Okay. Um, I've correlated many times the connection between the sun, which is radium, helium, right? Radium, helium's a byproduct of radium's. Um, the correlation that granite and all kinds of rock are melted by radium. Radium that lies in quantities below ground, far enough below ground, will dissolve the rock and create these open cavities, right? And like nature abhors a vacuum. So eventually that vacuum that grows and grows and grows and pressure builds and builds and builds, it'll eventually cave in, right? Sinkhole, cave in. And here you have large amounts of earth and water being displaced into this hole. These holes can be, who knows, absolutely gigantic. You've been following my work. You've seen some of these cave systems they explore and how they're hundreds of miles in extent. You can only imagine the cavities that exist below our feet. Titanically large. The sulfurous smell, the volcanic events they're describing from these fissures being opened up. It's like a movie, right? It's like a Hollywood movie. These fissures open, sulfur. If there's not sulfurous smell, there's boiling hot water. The springs are shooting straight up into the air, right? These springs are connected, right? And many of them have radium, high quantities of radium in them. They have their own water supply that snakes underground in these large veins that look very similar to a mining vein. And I postulated that these are related to large trees, and these veins are connected with the veins of. If you take a tree and you magnify its size, a tree transports sap and water all throughout its system, just like a human body does. And cavitation and these functions of transporting these liquids, you're left, when some event happens, you're left with large um, empty spaces. And that when a tree petrifies, it petrifies into all kinds of minerals, silver, gold, copper, and that radium was found in large quantities in these petrified trees. So you magnify a large tree and you make it, 100 times larger, miles tall, perhaps, miles around, perhaps. And again, I'm just postulating. You're left with large quantities of radium, and that radium is found in all light giving creatures. Um, Phosphorescence, mushrooms have radium in them. All kinds of trees are found to be phosphorescent. The tropical trees have a large amount of them. You can take a UV light through the rainforest and you'd be surprised, right? And the UV reaction is why we need a flashlight, but it's beyond the human visible light spectrum. Animals see these things freely. Think of the movie Avatar, right? If our vision wasn't so constricted to a very narrow bandwidth, we would see all these things naturally for what they are. So again, that's kind of a tangent there, but connecting something along these lines. Where was I? Okay, where was I? No, okay, electric fluid. Okay, where was I? I apologize. Undulating. Okay, we're gonna go back and read this one. Okay, because my highlighted portion was quite a bit smaller. So my apologies. We'll go back here and we'll touch on this, right? Just to remind ourselves where we were. For the remainder of the night, it was still calm, but spent us trembling in anxiety, right? They wished for the morning to come and they were happy when it did. Okay. And then we'll jump back into this article that I didn't expand. So my apologies there. Many were hurt. It was quickly followed by more violent shock, which gave the earth an undulating motion resembling the waves of the sea. Two of those who were standing with me were thrown from their feet, and the rest of us were difficultly kept from falling, while two or three cows that were near us were unable to stand. This intensified with fear by their loud bellowing, which, with the cries of the women and children and the terror was depicted in the countenances of men, presented a scene of horror I am unable to describe. It is somewhat strange that its effects were more violent in the valleys. Okay, so that's the part we read. So, past Sunday night, the shocked place died, but did little damage except to a few huts who were built near the springs. So, more damage along those springs, right? That were boiling 142 degrees plus. The fulminating of the mountains was accompanied with flashes of fire seen issuing from their sides. Each flash ended with a snap or a crack, like that heard from the discharge of an electric battery, but 1,000 times as large. This induced him to believe that the earthquake was caused by the electric fluid. Incredibly important. I apologize for leaving that out. So, the correlation again between the electricity, magnetism, right? I've talked about radium, the correlation between radium, how it ionizes the air, it creates a very hyper electrical environment, and that the iron rich lava flow is excited by this, and that a comet, and many comets have been hypothesized to be radium based, create huge ionization cavities, so to say, and they magnetically affect everything around them. So these iron rich mountains that may be full of lava, or the lava that is below the surface is excited and then drawn like a magnet to the comet. Now, magnetism and earthquakes and all of these things are excited by comets. This is worldwide phenomenon. And the aurora borealis, aurora raw based, the green lights have often also, in the early 1900s, many authors were like, oh, with the discovery of radium we're now able to postulate that the aurora borealis is absolutely not only related to the ionization of the air but directly related to the radium in the ground. Radium ionizes the air, and when you have magnetism near the poles affecting that ionized air, you can get that green glow, similar to the theory I postulated with comets. And then, of course, you would hear these electrical discharges because just like when a volcano erupts, the largest electrical display or the most lightning strikes ever recorded since we've been recording these things was that eruption that took place in Tonga not too long ago, a year ago or so. And there were more lightnings. I think there were 500,000 in the 24-hour period. Now, these things are just, you think of the magnetism attributed, the ionization, um, all of the colliding particles as well, but also the lava and the radium and the gases, the sulfurous gases, and all of these things being excited by this. And when you think about how radium gas was used for healing, and the sauna and the Roman bathhouses and the Moorish steam house were using steam from subterranean vaults, I would say radium rich. These things all correlate nicely with each other. I'm going to read one more here that's going to strengthen my opinions here. Volcano in Georgia. The comet is coming. And according to a writer in the Augusta Chronicle, a volcano has come. The correspondent states that a volcano has recently made its appearance in Pigeon Mountain, some 10 miles distance from the town of Lafayette, Walker County, Georgia. A roaring had been heard at intervals in the mountains since October 1856. Again, this is quite some time later, but the same phenomenon. And the 24th of April, last the earth was violently agitated, the account says. The citizens in the vicinity were aroused and terribly frightened by the commotion. When observing the mountain, they were more ever terrified, for a brilliant light was plainly seen issuing from the summit. The atmosphere soon became strongly impregnated with a disagreeable sulfuric odor. On the following day, a thick torrent of smoke and ashes ascended where this light was previously seen. The smoke was not visible at night. This was perhaps owing to the elements being covered at the time with a very dark cloud. No blaze has yet been seen to issue from the crater. It has continued about as above described ever since, emitting smoke and ashes without intermission. The crater is thought to be about 100 yards in diameter. No one has yet ventured near enough to ascertain anything of its general depth. Several springs in the vicinity have totally disappeared. Many of the citizens are very much alarmed, and some are even moving out of the valley through anticipations and fear of a violent eruption. So, yeah, I'll post this thread here in the comments below. I go on and on. I make quite a lot of connections to airlights, batteries, magnetism. Um, yeah, I could read all of these. Um, and to me, they're amazing. Electromagnetic, liquid rock, vortices. So, yeah, if you want to read more, make sure to check the description. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you found this entertaining and interesting, and get you thinking. Um, Again, thank you for being here. Love you all very much. Have a wonderful day.